More proof that shrinkflation is getting much worse. First off, what is shrinkflation? So here's a good definition of shrinkflation from the Corporate Finance Institute. In economics, shrinkflation is the process of reducing the size or quantity of a product while the price of the product remains the same or slightly increases. In some cases, the term also indicates the lower quality of a product or its ingredients while the price remains the same. So adding in here, that's called substitution, which is also not good for the consumer. The word, quote, shrinkflation, end quote, is a combination of the words shrink and inflation. British economist Dr. Pippa Malmgren is generally credited for inventing the term in 2009. The phenomenon is quite common in the food and beverage industry. Yeah, also grocery stores and consumer staples, as you can see by my picture here that I have in the background, that I just recently took side-by-side comparison of Charmin Ultra Strong toilet paper, the 12-pack. Continuing, breaking down shrinkflation from the article, essentially shrinkflation is a form of hidden inflation. Instead of increasing the price of a product that would be evident to consumers, producers reduce the size of products and thus raises the price per unit of weight or volume. So you get less goods and services for more dollars or euros or British pounds. The consumers are getting screwed over. The small reductions are usually unnoticed by consumers. Well, eventually people notice, but normally they blame capitalism. Shrinkflation is mostly used by the producers in the food and beverage industry whose consumers are concerned only with the price of goods and less concerned with their quantity. Note that the shrinkflation cannot be viewed as a fraud or misrepresentation of products. Conversely, producers always indicate the weight, volume, or quantity of their products on packaging label. It's there if you want to look at it. Just because the price stays the same or only increases a little bit does not mean you're getting the same amount of goods. The cost per unit has spiked very, very rapidly. And these companies are not evil. This is not the fault of capitalism. If these companies do not have a profit margin, they are in trouble, risking going bankruptcy too, because a lot of these companies, whether they borrow debt or not, and the ones who borrow debt are in even more trouble than the ones who did not, especially if their margins are thinner. But these companies have to have a margin. And if their margins dip too low, then workers get fired, the company could go bankrupt, and bad things happen to the company too. So the Austrian School of Economics definition of inflation is an increase in the money supply or increase in credit. And this monetary inflation or credit creation, massive credit creation, is what leads to the effects or symptoms of higher prices throughout the economy. Due to Cantillon effects, these things are going to be uneven. There could be higher labor costs, there could be higher energy costs, other inputs into a good or service could increase. But the point is that the monetary inflation, these central banks, these governments, forcing massive amounts of QE and credit creation in all these different countries is what's causing the supply chain flooding it. Okay, inflation is, as Ludwig von Mises says, 100% government created. And in the private sector, the producers of these goods and services, whether it's the company that makes Charmin Ultra Soft or the company that makes Kleenex tissue boxes or restaurants or whatever private sector good or service, they respond accordingly to their costs rising, trying to protect their profit margins. Because if their profit margins erode too much, the company risks going bankrupt. And then that means the owners of the company are in financial trouble. They have to fire their workers. Just a very vicious cycle of, it's a positive feedback loop, but it's very, very bad results for the economy. Again, with higher prices, higher prices are not inflation. So there are definitions I looked up in different articles of shrinkflation, and I have about 6 or 7 different articles of shrinkflation for you to look at, including a consumer study from the Office for National Statistics, which is in the United Kingdom, that was done in 2017, that concluded that 2,500 consumer products have shrunk in size over the past 5 years, despite being sold for the same price. And that's what official data has shown. So if you want to learn more into that, and that includes that there was an enormous amount of shrinkflation of over 200 consumer products in England in just a 2-year period, about a 2-year period from 2015, part of 2015 to 2017. So just massive amounts. And they're saying that the inflation, the cost of the goods only rose between 1% and 3% on average, but in reality, I guarantee you, they didn't look at the cost per unit. In fact, I've actually listened to Federal Reserve interns who have gone to the grocery store and Target to record prices, and they don't even measure the cost per unit going up. So the cost per unit of some of these goods at the grocery store or restaurants, it could go up in the high teens, 20%, 30%, which would match more of what we're seeing in reality. So if you want to read more about this study that was done, I'll attach links to some of these articles. Now, the real world, I think the best measure of the real world inflation rate that shows the effects of inflation is the Chapwood Inflation Index by Ed Batowski, and he's a professional money manager, and he spoke to John Williams of Shadow Stats, and this is based his methodology where he surveys, I think twice a year, thousands of people on 500 different consumer items, and he's come up with a 5-year average annual inflation rate of between 8% in cities like Phoenix and 13.2% in cities in the San Francisco and San Jose metro area. And inflation in many cities is running between 10% and 12%. So it's enormous inflation rate. And this is what we're seeing here on the picture that I showed you that I took side-by-side comparison of the Charmin Ultra Soft, this 12-pack. And so this is a 13% loss at least in purchasing power, that I get a lot less toilet paper for the dollars that I pay. Only about 2 months ago, at the same this was bought at the same Target too. At the same Target, you could buy 54 equivalent 12-roll pack with 330 two-ply sheets for, I think, a lower price than the price I just paid a couple days ago for a 48-roll equivalent 12-roll pack that only has 286 two-ply sheets, and the price was, I think, $1 higher. So already I've lost 13% on just that one good. I've lost at least 13% of my purchasing power. And in some consumer goods, consumer staples, whether it's food or not, people are losing even more than that. Feel free to comment below this video and share some of your stories about substitution, how you've noticed consumer products or restaurants have substituted out goods for lower quality to maintain their profit margin, or a dramatic reduction in portion size at either a grocery store or restaurant, or just loss of consumer staples. Another massive evidence of shrinkflation is in Kleenex tissue boxes. I remember distinctly about 2 years ago, I think it stopped 2 years ago, that you could buy in Target or other places a 230 Kleenex box. And now that same, for about the same price, you only get 144 tissues in that Kleenex box. So just an enormous amount of shrinkflation. And again, shrinkflation is not the cause of inflation, as some of these articles on shrinkflation are claiming, like the Keynesians claim that higher prices is inflation. Higher prices are a symptom. They are an effect, not the cause of inflation. The cause of inflation are these governments and their central banks flooding the global economy and individual economies with massive amounts of artificially cheap digital debt-based fiat currency and credit. They've made the cost of money way too cheap. They're manipulating interest rates lower. China's flooding credit. The US has a corporate bond bubble. The money supply in China has gone parabolic. And the European Union is a disaster filled with hidden inflation and taxes on top of other problems. I expect, unfortunately, this shrinkflation narrative, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And this fits in perfectly with my stagflate and my stagflate and tax and lie narrative, as governments will almost always, if they do any study at all, and the United Kingdom actually did a study, although they did report the amount of shrinkflation lower, that they won't even study this at all, really. They're not going to measure cost per unit, which is where in some of these items, cost per unit every couple of years, people are losing 30%, 40% of their purchasing power in just a handful of years. It's truly tragic. So people's standards of living will decrease, unfortunately, unless they hustle, unless they develop a side hustle, unless they figure out how to grow their revenues or income. So that means being entrepreneurial. That means finding more skills to work with family and friends to build a side business or a side hustle, and figuring out how to maintain your standard of living in a stagflate and tax and lie and shrinkflation environment, where just for a lot of these businesses, restaurants and consumer staple companies, to survive, they're going to have to give you less for more dollars or more euros or whatever currency is local to you. So this is the sad reality of the situation. I just wanted to show you guys with this short little video more proof that shrinkflation is indeed getting much worse. Please like this video, share it with friends and family, and don't forget to subscribe to the Wall Street for Main Street YouTube channel if you have not already done so. Thanks for helping Wall Street for Main Street pass the 20,000 YouTube channel subscriber milestone despite YouTube censorship. Hopefully, we'll be able to get to 30,000 or even 40,000 YouTube channel subscribers quickly if YouTube doesn't shut down this channel. If YouTube does shut down this channel, remember to also sign up for the Wall Street for Main Street email list that's on the wallstreetformainstreet.com website and will tell you where the videos are going to be uploaded instead of YouTube. Also, if you really like the content and you decide that you want to give a one-time donation, you can go to wallstreetformainstreet.com. That's wallstreetformainst.com website, where there's different options for you to do so. Or you can become a Patreon contributor. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to providing my loyal listeners with some of the best information, analysis, and financial education available out there, free or paid, as I work to grow the podcast and also get my educational technology company funded.